At Christmas. Aunt said, "You look so much better now." And I realized she meant now I wasn't taking up as much space. My fork paused halfway to my mouth, a bit of overcooked carrot slipping back into the gravy. The room was loud. Cutlery scraping plates, cousins yelling over Mario Kart in the next room, the TV humming some carols no one was listening to. But her voice cut through all of it, sugar-sweet and sharp. She reached over to pat my arm, nails clicking against my bare skin where last year there'd been sleeves that didn't quite fit. My cheeks got hot. I swallowed the lump of food that suddenly felt like concrete and forced my face into what I hoped looked like a normal smile, not the flinch my body wanted to do. "It's just so nice to see you looking healthy," she added, eyes flicking down my body and back up, pretending that second look wasn't full-body scan level obvious. Across the table my mum gave this little tight nod, like she'd just signed off on a performance review. My dad didn't look up from carving the ham, but his mouth twitched. My cousin Jess caught my eye for half a second and raised her eyebrows. "The smallest, you okay?" She could manage without getting involved. My thighs pressed against the chair harder than they needed to. I suddenly became very aware of how much space my body took between the arms of the seat. It was our first normal Christmas since everything happened. That's how my mum kept referring to it in the lead-up. "It'll be nice to have a normal Christmas." As if the phrase itself could scrub the last year off like a stain. By normal, she meant. I'd moved back to the same city after the breakup. I wasn't crying on the phone every second day. And, apparently most importantly, I was about 25 kilos lighter than the last time everyone saw me. For most of my life, I'd been the big one in the family. Not in a cuddly, affectionate way, just observational. A fact people felt weirdly entitled to narrate out loud. "You were always such a solid baby," Mum would say, laughing, flicking through old photo albums while teenage me tried not to die inside. "Built to last," Dad would add. Auntie Sandra, today's commentator, specialized in subtle digs disguised as concern. "Maybe don't go back for seconds, sweetheart," she'd say at barbecues. "You know, slow metabolism runs in our side of the family." Or the classic, "I'm just worried about your health," said while gifting me diet books wrapped in Christmas paper with little Santas on them. By high school, I'd perfected the art of pretending I didn't care. I leaned hard into being the funny one. When some boy made a crack about my thighs in year 10, I made a bigger joke about my built-in cushions and everyone laughed and moved on. It was better to be the one controlling the punchline than the one standing there waiting to see if I was the joke. The thing is, I wasn't actually unhealthy. I played netball, I walked everywhere. My GP never once told me there was anything wrong with my blood pressure or cholesterol. But none of that mattered as much as how much space I took up in photos. In uni, I met Mark. If this was our /relationship advice, I'd probably have titled this "My Ex Said He Loved Me, No Matter What," while always reminding me what looked like. He was charming and funny and, at first, made me feel like I was the only person in the room. We met in a tutorial and he asked me out for coffee under the fluorescent lights of the science building. "You're really pretty," he said on that first date, before I could make a self-deprecating joke. "I bet guys are intimidated by you." My brain latched onto the first half and ignored the weirdness of the second. Someone thought I was pretty. Full stop. That was new. We moved fast. Too fast, looking back. Within a year, we were living together in a tiny apartment with mold in the bathroom and a view of a brick wall, eating instant noodles and pretending to be adults. For a while, it was good. He made me playlists. I proofread his essays. We binge-watched shows and ordered late-night pizza, and it felt like what I thought being in love was supposed to be. The comments started small. "Do you really want to eat that?" he'd ask, half joking, when I reached for a second slice. "We're already both getting a bit comfortable." Or, "Maybe we should start going to the gym together, so we don't let ourselves go." I laughed it off, joined the gym, downloaded an app. We counted calories together. When I lost a few kilos, he made a big deal of it. "Look at you," he'd say, grabbing my waist. "So proud of you." When I gained them back during exam season, the tone shifted. "I just worry about your discipline," he said once, standing in the doorway while I sat on the couch with a bowl of pasta. If you can't stick to something simple like this, how are you going to handle real commitments? I put the fork down. It's just dinner, I said. He sighed. You know that's not what I mean. What he meant, I think, was your body is a project and I've taken it on, and if you don't cooperate, you're failing us both. I didn't leave when that started. Or when he began doing that thing where he'd say, "Are you really wearing that?" before we went out. Or when he'd make comments about the hot girls in his office and then reassure me that I was cute in my own way. What finally broke me was last year's Christmas. Or, more accurately, the night after it. We'd flown up to see my family. I'd been dreading it for weeks. I'd gained more weight that year than ever before, partly from stress, partly from comfort eating because work was hell and my relationship felt like walking on eggshells. When I tried to tell Mark I was nervous about seeing everyone, he said, "Just don't eat so much while we're there. Self-control isn't that hard." At Christmas lunch, Aunt Sandra did her usual running commentary. "You filled out," she said as I walked in before hello. "Good living, hey?" She laughed like it was affectionate. Mum swatted her arm and said, "Oh, leave her alone," but in that performative way that meant she agreed. Later, while we were doing presents, she handed me a parcel that felt like a brick. I unwrapped it to find a book titled something like, "Drop 2 sizes in 8 weeks." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, cheeks burning hot enough to fry an egg. Mark squeezed my knee under the table and leaned in to whisper, "Maybe it'll be good motivation," like he was on my side. On the flight home, I cried quietly while he slept with his mouth open. That night, doing that pathetic New Year's resolution thing on my phone, I wrote, "Lose 20 kilograms and be better" in a notes app. 2 weeks later, everything imploded. We had a huge fight about something stupid, the dishes, I think, and it spiraled into a greatest hits compilation of every resentment we'd both been storing. He called me lazy. I threw back that he was controlling. He said, "I just want a girlfriend who takes care of herself." I yelled, "I just want a boyfriend who doesn't make my body his hobby." He walked out, slammed the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. I slid down the kitchen cabinets and sat on the floor, shaking, surrounded by shards of a cheap IKEA frame and the realization that I couldn't do it anymore. The months after that were rough. I moved back in with my parents temporarily because I couldn't afford the rent by myself. My appetite vanished. Anxiety sat in my throat like a fist. Most days the idea of swallowing anything more substantial than toast made me nauseous. I walked a lot, not because I was trying to exercise, but because being in the house made my skin crawl and walking was the only thing that made the buzzing in my brain quiet down. The weight came off fast. People started commenting. "Break-up diet," my friends joked. "You look amazing," my coworker said. My mum's eyes lit up when she picked me up from the airport for Easter. "You've got your figure back," she said. "That boy must have been bad for you." No one asked if I was sleeping. No one noticed that my hands shook when I made tea, or that my cheeks were hollow not from green smoothies but from crying myself sick. Eventually I moved out again, into a share house with Jess and another friend. I started seeing a therapist. I learned words like disordered eating and hypervigilance. I had weeks where I ate normally and weeks where I lived on coffee and anxiety. Slowly, the weight stabilized. I bought clothes that actually fit my new size, not in a triumphant after-photo way, but in a resigned none of my old jeans stay up way. And then Christmas rolled around again. Mum called in November. "You're coming this year, right?" she said, in the tone that suggested there was a correct answer. "Everyone's excited to see you. Sandra said she hardly recognized you at Easter in a good way." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Yeah," I said, "I'll come." I spent weeks rehearsing responses in my head for all the potential comments. "Please don't comment on my body. I'd rather not talk about my weight. My health isn't up for discussion." All these calm, boundary-respecting phrases I'd seen on Instagram infographics. In my head, I was this poised, unbothered woman who could shut down nonsense with a gentle smile. In reality, the second I stepped through the front door and heard, "Look at you," I reverted to the same awkward teenager who used to hide behind the fridge when relatives arrived. Skinny Minnie, Uncle Rob boomed, pulling me into a brief, suffocating hug that smelled like cologne and beer. City life agrees with you, hey? Mum kissed my cheek and held me at arm's length. You do look good, she said, approval warm and bright in her eyes. See what happens when you're not stuck with a man who drags you down? Jess hovered near the hallway, already mouthing breathe at me like a reminder. By the time Aunt Sandra dropped her, "You look so much better now" bomb at the table, I'd already absorbed about 8 versions of the same message. Better now you're smaller. Better now you're less. Better now you fit into their visual of what I should look like. My brain did that weird split-screen thing it does now. On one side, the old script, the swallow your feelings and be grateful reflex. On the other, therapy voice, quietly going, what did before look like to them? What does better mean in their mouths? I put my fork down carefully so I wouldn't slam it. What do you mean by better? I heard myself ask, in a voice that sounded higher than usual. Aunt Sandra blinked, surprised I challenged it. Well, you know, she said, twirling her wine glass. You're looking after yourself. You've slimmed down. You've got a glow. A glow, Jess muttered into her mashed potatoes. But I was also looking after myself before, I said, heart starting to thud. And I've lost most of this weight because I went through a really rough time. Mum shot me a warning look. Let's not spoil Christmas with heavy talk, she said. It's not heavy, I said, even though my chest felt like someone had set a brick on it. It's just context. I turned back to my aunt. When you say I look better, it kind of sounds like you're saying I didn't look good before. Sandra gave that offended laugh middle-aged women specialize in. Oh, don't be so sensitive, she said. You know I never meant it like that. You just look more put together. You were so big for a while there. I was worried about your heart. There it was. Big, like a bad word. Worried about my heart. As if my heart had only learned to beat properly once my thighs stopped touching. My own heart hammered louder. I could feel my face getting hot, the way it always does right before I cry or yell. I took a sip of water to buy myself a second. The glass rattled against my teeth. I get that you mean it as a compliment, I said slowly, but my body isn't really up for feedback, positive or negative, especially not when the positive is about a version of me that was mostly just really sad. Sad, Dad finally chimed in. You've got a roof over your head and a job and people who love you. What's there to be sad about? Jess put her fork down with a clink. Oh my God, she muttered. I could feel the table tense, like everyone sensed the current shifting. The kids in the next room yelled about someone cheating at Mario Kart. The smell of roasted vegetables and gravy suddenly made my stomach turn. Plenty, I said, more sharply than I meant to. But that's not the point. The point is, everyone keeps commenting on my body like it's a group project you all did together. And it's a lot. Aunt Sandra's mouth opened and closed like a guppy. We're just trying to be nice, she said. Okay, I said. Then maybe say, it's nice to see you, instead of you look better now. Because what I hear when you say that is, we liked you more when you were smaller. And that sucks. You could have heard a cranberry sauce drop. Mum tooted under her breath. This is what therapy does, she said to no one in particular. Teaches you to be rude to your elders. There it was. The old script. I could feel it like a hook under my ribs, trying to pull me back into apology mode. My tongue tried to form the words I've said 1,000 times. Sorry, you're right, I'm overreacting. Jess kicked me lightly under the table and gave the tiniest shake of her head. I took a breath. It's not rude to tell you how something makes me feel, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. You asked why I've been distant. That's part of it. I don't want to spend every family event bracing for comments about my body. Josh, my younger cousin, cleared his throat. Yeah, Aunt S, you do kind of comment on everyone's weight, he said. You told me I'd filled out last year, and I thought about it for like 3 months. Sandra stared at him, genuinely shocked. I was just saying. That's the thing, Jess cut in. You're just saying. But it sticks. Maybe we just don't say it. Mum looked between us like we'd all joined a cult. Dad went back to his ham, muttering, can't say anything these days without it being wrong. The conversation slid away after that, into safer territory, presents, work, the weather, but the air felt different. Heavier in some ways, lighter in others. Aunt Sandra was quieter than usual. She didn't make any more comments about my portion sizes. Later, in the kitchen, elbows deep in soapy water, Jess bumped my shoulder. You okay? She asked. I feel like I just swallowed a brick, I said. But also, kind of relieved? She snorted. You did great, she said. I've wanted to say something for years. I just never had the guts. Pretty sure Mum's going to text me later about how I ruined Christmas, I said. Probably, she agreed. But that's future you's problem. She handed me a dripping plate. Present you gets to exist without being a walking before and after ad. I laughed then, a short, surprised burst that made my shoulders loosen for the first time all day. When I got home that night, my phone had exactly one text from Mum. You embarrassed Sandra. You know she didn't mean anything by it. We were just happy to see you looking after yourself. Think about that. I stared at it for a long time, that last sentence glowing accusingly. Looking after yourself. As if my current body, the thinner one, proved self-care, and my bigger body proved neglect. As if the months I couldn't eat from heartbreak were discipline. Tara, my therapist, once asked, what does looking after yourself actually look like? For you. Not according to your mum, your aunt, your ex. For you. For me, right now it looks like eating dinner even when no one is watching. Going for a walk because it clears my head. Not because my fitness tracker tells me I'm behind. Unfollowing Fitspo accounts that make me feel like a failure. Telling Aunt Sandra to keep her comments to herself, even if my voice shakes. It does not look like starving through heartbreak and calling it an achievement. I didn't reply to Mum that night, or the next day. In session that week, I read the text out to Tara, my voice wobbling halfway through. She's not actually listening to what you said, Tara pointed out gently. She's only listening to what it means for her, that she might have done something wrong. That's a scary thought for her. So she rushes to reassure herself that her intentions were good. It always comes back to that, I said. Their intentions, never the impact. Exactly, she said. And you're allowed to prioritize impact. You're allowed to say, I know you didn't mean harm. It hurt anyway. Please stop. That's basically what I said. I realized. She smiled. Yeah, it is. So that's why I'm here, I guess. Typing this out to strangers on the internet because it feels safer than saying it at the table where everyone watched me grow up. At Christmas, my aunt said, you look so much better now. And I realized she meant, now you're smaller. Now you're palatable. Now I don't have to worry about how your body makes me feel. I also realized I don't have to accept that as the definition of better. Better, for me, is not a number on a scale or a dress size. It's the fact that this year, when my body became the topic of conversation, again, I didn't just laugh and go along with it. I didn't swallow the concrete in my throat and store the hurt for later. I pushed it back across the table and said, no thanks. That's not for me. They might never understand that. They might always look at photos of me from last Christmas and think, thank God she finally sorted herself out. They might tell that story at future gatherings. How the breakup did me good. How I finally started looking after myself. But I know the real story. The year I looked so much better is also the year I cried on the kitchen floor, shaking because my ex had called me unlovable. It's the year I learned how to eat again without panic. It's the year I realized my family's compliments hurt as much as their jokes. And it's the year I decided that the only better I'm interested in is the one where I'm more at home in my own skin, regardless of how anyone else thinks it should look.